to give you an overview of what we will go through this session today, which is about how to include engagement in Horizon 2020. And it's some of what we will present today are some of the results from the Engage2020 project. What we will talk about first is, I'll give a short introduction of the Engage2020 project. We'll talk about what is engagement. We'll give some examples of engagement in Horizon 2020, but also from other previous European research projects, and also from some national projects as well. And then we'll talk about some tools that can help you further. And after this, we'll give room for questions for you or comments, etc. Seems and once again, I will mute your microphone so that we don't have so much background noise. If you have any questions, please write them to me, and I will collect them in the end. So, well, Engage2020, it's a European project that we have just are about to finalize. It's been lasting a little bit more than 2 years. We started in September 2013. It's a FP7 project aimed at enhancing societal engagement in Horizon 2020. And we have partners in Bulgaria, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK. The key aims of Engage2020 is to support and ensure better quality of societal engagement in research and innovation. And I'll just see if I can move. Someone is not here. Okay. So the key purpose of Engage2020 is to ensure more and better societal engagement in research and innovation, and especially with a focus on Horizon 2020, because Horizon 2020 is so far the biggest research program in the European Union. It's 80 billion euros in funding. It runs over 7 years. And one of the key aims of Horizon 2020 is to achieve smart, sustainable and inclusive economic growth in the European Union. So with this aim, it should call for societal engagement. And also, yeah, Horizon 2020 is working with the 7 grand challenges, which is also makes sense. Sorry. Someone says they can't hear me. As far as I understand, you can pretty much all hear me. Is that correct? Sorry. If you have problems with locking on, if you can write while I'm speaking, if you can write to Edward Anderson, who is the co-organizer at the moment, and he will be able to help you out.
I'm here to help. So just write to me, Edward Anderson. I can help you sort out your audio problems, and my user will focus on the presentation.
Okay, yeah. So Horizon 2020 is a huge research and innovation program, and it's about sustainable, it's about inclusive growth, and they're working with 7 grand challenges, which are altogether covers almost everything. The health and demographic change, secure societies, food security, sustainable agriculture, energy, transport, climate change, resource efficiency, inclusive and innovative societies. So these are some areas that almost covers any kind of societal problem that you can have. So what we're doing in the Engage 2020 project is that we look on the prospects of engagement. We are scanning practice of engagement, both when it comes to what are the good methods that can be used, and also what are the policies that support public engagement. So the Engage 2020 project are working on 2 strands. We're looking at both how do you practically engage civil society, and how can we support more engagement of civil society in research and innovation in terms of policies within institutions, but also within the policy area. Then we also have looked on future perspectives, and we also try to, how can we take this into action. And in Horizon 2020, we work with 4 levels of public engagement. In research and innovation, we have 4 levels where we see that public engagement can be useful, can be included, and where they will have a purpose. One of it is policy formation. It can be policy on research and innovation, but also focus on policy recommendations in connection to research and innovation. We also focus on program development. Where can you support public engagement in program development? This is in formulating the research agendas, for example, deciding what kind of program should there be for research and innovation. Then we also look at the level of project design or project development. How can you include public engagement in the process of defining what research projects should be about? So it can be, for example, in Science Shop, where civil society organizations ask to have researched on some specific topics or problems. And then at the 4th level that we're working with in the Engage 2020 project is in the research and innovation activities themselves. So collecting data, for example, as citizen science. So these are the 4 levels that we work with in Engage 2020. And of course, one of the reasons why the Engage 2020 project in the first place got funded, and one of the purposes of the European Commission that we are supporting is the cross-cutting issue of responsible research and innovation RRI, which have some principles about being inclusive, anticipatory, reflexive, and responsive. And the RRI is also about, it's a cross-cutting theme. It's about ethics, it's about governance, but it's also about public engagement. So we are supporting the principle of public engagement in responsible research and innovation. Just one moment. And these are the dimensions that that the European Commission would like to see integrated in research and innovation to be integrated in research and innovation from the European Union side. And this is supposed to give us an advantage in the future compared to other research and innovation. Also make sure that the research and innovation that we make in the European Union is in touch with what is the needs of society and the perspectives of society. Give a more holistic view. So now I think we will move on to talk a little bit about what is engagement, and I will give Edward Anderson the voice for this. So Edward?
Yes, Marie-Louise, many thanks for that. So as Marie-Louise said, the project is on, yeah, maybe mute your microphone there, Marie-Louise. The project is on public engagement, societal engagement around research and innovation. Now this is a very broad field of work, which has obviously made the Engage project both challenging but also very interesting, because we really are talking about activities which span the whole range from the very large policy making to the very small, as Marie-Louise said. So we have done a lot of research into public engagement. We've got some very good reports, which I will talk to you about a bit later. But suffice to say that this kind of work goes back several decades, but has really started to gain momentum recently. There are many reasons for doing participation and engagement. I mean, one big one is, of course, that society has changed. We have more active citizens. We have more, we have technological means for engaging people in ways which would just be impossible several decades ago. And also science has changed. The challenges we face have changed. So many people across Europe are doing public engagement for different reasons. Some for very instrumental reasons. They want to see results, and others for different reasons. Yeah, you can jump to the next slide, Marie-Louise. So as we said, it's the 4 levels, all the way from big policy formulation, involving in programs, involving in the development of projects, and of course actual involvement in research and innovation activities. And it's interesting to note that in today's Europe, hundreds of thousands of citizens are involved in directly in research and innovation projects annually. So this is really growing, it's really picking up. Next slide, please. And of course we have a wide variety. When we talk about public engagement, it's not so easy to say that the public is one thing. In fact, many people, many academics say, well, we should actually be talking about publics. And this has also been a complicating factor when we've talked about, when you think about how do you involve society in Horizon 2020, well, what part of society do you want to reach? And that will depend on your project. Sometimes we engage with civil society organizations. Sometimes we try to reach out to citizens, maybe randomly selected or a stratified sample of citizens. Sometimes it's people who are affected by a certain issue, or consumers or patients, employees, users, and sometimes different groups. So public participation, public engagement and public participation really encompasses a wide range of activities and a wide range of different groups. Next slide, please. And so what we've tried to do at Engage is to try and systematize this and look at what can we see, how are different groups engaged at different stages. And for those who are interested in the detailed results, I really would recommend looking at some of the reports I'll talk to you about later. Next slide, please. One important thing that I think we do need to stress when we talk about engagement, firstly, is that it is about involvement in research and innovation activities, and involvement which also has influence. Now, influence can obviously mean different things in different contexts. If you're involving people at the policy level, influence will be different from a citizen science project where you're actively involving citizens in the research. But I think it's very important that we maintain this principle that this is not simply science communication. Engagement is a step further. It involves a two-way interaction and some kind of meaningful opportunity to influence. Next slide. This is a useful table by my colleague Henk Mulder, who's been very active in the project as part of the consortium. And I think this shows us a number of very important things, and that is that we can group participation along a scale from the very limited influence that participants have over the research and innovation, like discussing or consulting, all the way through involving, collaborating, empowering, and then direct decisions, where we actually push, where citizens have more, the public have more say over the final decision. There's a lot of influence. And as you can see, we have an increasing level of interaction as we share more power, but then of course when we actually start to give direct power to citizens around science and research issues, we have less interaction with them perhaps because they're doing things on their own. And you can also see that the control over the process or the initiative also shifts. The more power we give to citizens, of course, the more initiative they have in the process. So we need to, this is also important. If you're starting out to develop public engagement in a research process in Horizon 2020, you need to really go and answer the questions. Which level am I working with? Which groups of the public does it make sense for me to engage with? And how much control, how much influence am I willing to give to people? Next slide, please. And it's also important, I think, to recognize that when we talk about public engagement, this is an umbrella term. It encompasses a whole array of different approaches which are which have evolved separately and are now beginning to blend in together and collaborate in very interesting ways. But we have technology assessment. I think our colleagues at the Danish Board of Technology are obviously a pioneer in that regard. So these are institutions that use deliberative approaches, approaches of inquiry to look at upcoming developing modes of technology to find out what does an informed public opinion look about certain issues. Engagement of CSOs in research and innovation obviously has a long history, and in certain fields like health, it's very well established. You have the active involvement of users in innovation projects, in health research. You have active involvement in workplace innovation as a way of increasing productivity, improving results. We have science shops, so centers at universities and other higher education institutions which aim to act as a bridge between CSOs and citizens and the research community to allow citizens to affect and influence research questions. And citizen science, which goes back a long time, 100 years or so in terms of astronomy and the work with academics and bird watchers. But this is the direct involvement, allows the direct involvement of citizens in research and innovation activities. And it's very common in certain fields and much less common in others. But we are seeing that these approaches are becoming more widespread, and they're beginning to work together and influence each other. So this is exciting. But it's important for you to reflect on, you have these existing fields of knowledge and good practice. And if you're setting up a Horizon 2020 project, which of these fields could you tap into? We'll talk more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now we're talking about the actual practicality. What does public engagement in Horizon 20 look like at the moment? And I'll give you a few practical examples. And this is the menu, in a sense, of what you could do. If you're setting up a project, if you're thinking about organizing a research project, and the bid text says, and we really want to see public engagement as part of this project. Well, if you're new to it, it looks a bit daunting and a little bit nerve-wracking, perhaps. So let's look at the menu. What could you do as part of a research process? Well, you can obviously have the public actively initialize research, which I think is very important and very valuable, because you need to have, this often happens to science shops, so citizens raise their own research questions. You can also make use of crowdfunding. Citizens could help you fund your research and build resources. They can help set R&I agendas at the policy-making level. So citizens have been actively involved in assessing nanotechnologies, synthetic biology, and many other big emerging issues in many European countries. They can supervise research and innovation. They can sit on a steering group or an ethics group, or just in general keep tabs on how the research is going. They can help shape the research and innovation process in an ongoing way. They can gather and analyze data, and of course they can help you to disseminate research and innovation outcomes. So really it's wrong to think of public engagement as a one-off, as a single intervention in time. It can be many things, and you need to think about what makes sense for your particular research and innovation process. Next slide, please. So let's look at a few practical examples. And this is a very recent one, 2014. And it's a good example, I think, of a policy formation process. This was about sustainable consumption, obviously a really important issue. And it made use of a methodology called worldwide views, which the Danish Board of Technology have developed, and which allows, although in this case, of course, it should be more correctly termed European-wide views, it is a process which allows for many meetings to be held in different locations using the same methodology, and therefore creating comparable results. And so as you see here, 11 countries took part across Europe. So you have 11 snapshots of what citizens think, and it's not just an uninformed opinion. It is a process which is designed specifically to allow the development and understanding of informed opinions and how people's views maybe shift when they find out more facts or discuss with others. Marie-Louise, do you have any thoughts on the worldwide views methodology that you'd like to share with the participants?
I'm not really sure if I have something to add that you haven't already said, but the worldwide views method is very good for simultaneous citizen engagement, where you can have it across many countries at the same time. It's just been applied in a global setting earlier this year with 79 meetings across the world, more than 10,000 citizens participating in a full day meeting on leading up to the COP in France. So it's something that it has a lot of it demands a lot of central coordination, but once you have the coordination settled, then you can add on as many partners as possible. And it's a very highly coordinated, because everything needs to be the same in all countries.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good way of a good summary of this kind of. So maybe your project is at the policy level, and then in that case, a methodology like this would make lots of sense. Or maybe you're working at a research program level, and let's look at the next case.
Maybe just a small add-on here. Well, this was on a policy level, and it was giving input into the policy formation process. And in such a case, it's of course always very valuable to have close contact to some of the policymakers or the politicians that need to be able to work with the results later on, so that you ensure both that they have an interest in it, but also making sure that the questions that you put out to the citizens are the ones that are relevant for the policy process going on. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next case we want to draw attention to is at the program level, and that is the Civisti approach, which made use of a consultation panel model to look at a variety of issues, but it was very much a it's very much about research agenda setting, and I think that's what distinguishes it from processes like European-wide views. So this is a case where national consultation panels were organized in order to kind of gather together some of the views of the public. These were then translated into EU-relevant policy options and research priorities with the help of experts. So public engagement doesn't necessarily mean, or usually doesn't mean, that the public are in there on their own discussing. It's very much a dialogue between experts and members of the public. And this was around foresight, and it gave citizens the opportunity to influence long-term program development of science and technology. Now, of course, one of the challenges of working with policy and with program development is that it can get quite abstract, and the impacts of the process will often happen in longer term. But I think they're still absolutely vital because of obviously many people talk about the importance of upstream engagement, of engaging early, because by the time we actually have research processes or research programs in place, we really are past the point of where the public could influence. A lot of decisions have already been made. So this, again, was a relatively small group of people, 175 people, 25 participants in each country, but it's important not to just look at numbers of participants. It is also a question of what is the result that you're getting. And oftentimes comparing different participation processes based just on numbers is a bit like comparing apples and pears. Anything you want to add about Civisti, Marie-Louise?
Just adding, I mean, Civisti is a couple of years ago. Later on, the Commission has had the Voices project, which did focus groups, also to give input for the policy or for the program development of research calls. And earlier this year, we just started a follow-up project, both building on Civisti, but also the Voices project, which is called the Simulact, which will have engagement processes in 30 countries in Europe, providing input into the program development of research and innovation. So it's supposed to give concrete input into the next round of calls for Horizon 2020. So it's just a current example of building on the Civisti model.
Excellent. So there's lots happening, and of course that's one of the challenges with the project, keeping up to date with everything that's developing, but that's a good problem to have. The next case is about research projects, because of course those of you who are actively involved in research, the policy and the programs are all good and well, but the actual work happens in projects. And one of the most common ways of engaging citizens at this level are science shops, and this is what this example is about. Now, science shops have had a very long history. This is, again, an example that Dr. Henk Mulder has contributed, the University of Groningen. I think Henk said that the science shop is 40 years old at this stage. So these are structures which in many cases have been around for a very long time. I like this case. It's started in 2002. And it came about because citizens, residents near wind farms had certain concerns about noise levels. And the wind farms producers and many of the experts said the wind farms were perfectly located. It wasn't too close. The residents shouldn't be disturbed by the noise. Of course, many universities don't just teach and don't just do research. They also have a third mission, which is about connecting to society. And I think Science Shop fills a really important role in that wider societal function of higher education. So the Science Shop put the citizens and the CSOs in contact with a researcher who was able to work with the citizens to develop a valid research question. And what's interesting here is that it turned out the citizens had the cause for concern that measurements were taken during daylight hours at night, the air acts differently and sound travels further. So actually this project, where the question came from citizens, actually then had a direct impact on wind farm siting policy. So I think it's a really good example of how citizen concerns can then be turned into much more relevant and much more useful research questions. So again, that might be something to consider when you're setting up a research project. Now, I don't know, I think Henk, Henk's in the audience, is he?
Yes.
Yes, Henk, do you have anything you wanted to add about this project or any other useful Science Shop examples that you might want to share with the group?
Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Okay. Yeah, in this case, there was a mathematical model that was subscribed by the government. So it was used by all the commercial consultants to calculate the noise amount, and especially at night we found that the model was wrong. So it really took a scientist to open this black box of the model and to have an in-depth study on it, and we developed an alternative to this model that was later integrated in the national model. And the scientist working on it wrote a PhD thesis on it and published a number of scientific papers. He involved students in the work. So in fact, the work of the Science Shop was added into the regular tasks of the university, which are research and learning. And so it was not like an add-on process, which makes it efficient. And that's the way that science shops can operate at higher education institutes. And it's also the way that you can take societal questions as a starting point for your research, because without this offer from the university to be open to questions from society, this new knowledge would not have been developed.
Thank you, Henk. I mean, that's one of the things I really like in many of these processes. It really clearly makes for better research, and scientists can develop better research and actually helps scientists in their careers because it ensures the relevance of their research. Thanks for that. And now let's move on to the last case I'm going to share with you, and that's the final and fourth level, namely direct involvement in research and innovation. And I'm picking one here, which is Snapshot Serengeti, which is part of a much bigger family of citizen science projects called Zooniverse. Many of you are probably members there or have seen it. Zooniverse has 1 million users signed up. And basically, in the case of Snapshot Serengeti, they have lots and lots of automated cameras that detect motion and take pictures on the Serengeti, which gives the researchers a tremendous amount of images of animals, which would in theory help them to understand migration patterns, how threatened the species is, etc. The problem is, of course, if you have 1 million pictures, you won't have enough research assistants to actually go through and manage it. So in this case, with the citizen science, the images are added to an online web portal, and ordinary citizens can spend however much time they want to give, 5 minutes or 3 hours or several days, looking at pictures from the Serengeti, and then looking at the list. You can see this on the screenshot to the right. There's a long list of all kinds of animals that you might reasonably see on the Serengeti, and you can tag and say, well, in this case, we have 2 wildebeest in the picture. And because the same image is checked by several citizens, if one citizen has a problem or doesn't do it correctly, it doesn't really matter because it all evens out. It also has some really useful functions. There's a looks-like function, so it says it looks a little bit like a gazelle, but not quite, and then it'll suggest animals that it might be. And Snapshot Serengeti is one example. They managed to process a huge amount of very valuable data and add to research processes. But people are doing exactly the same thing with ship's logs from the 1800s, cancer cells, war journals from the First World War. And this is really helping a tremendous amount of research processes. Citizen science, and especially the online platforms, are very convenient. They allow people who would never have time to get involved in other ways to participate. And I think what's very exciting to see is that citizen science is also becoming more ambitious. Zooniverse has now created a function where citizens could create their own processes and projects. So I think this is another interesting example of how you could involve ordinary citizens, even in the actual nitty-gritty, day-to-day research work. But don't stop at just data gathering and data analysis. They can also play a very important role in setting research questions and holding the process to account. So that's citizen science. Very interesting, very valuable. There are lots of good examples out there. Marie-Louise has already mentioned a few of them. There's the Similac project, CASI, GAP2, which among other things looked at fisheries, Improfood, food security there, Pasita, Peraris, SecurePart, which looks at security, involvement in security, Voices, which was also already mentioned. So do look on the European Union Commission's website around these issues, because there are a lot of projects, very valuable projects, which have already involve citizens in various research fields. So it's not necessary to start from scratch. And many of these projects have very valuable tools and resources that you can make use of. Next slide, please. So now we talk about the next step, which is, well, it's all good and well, right? We now, hopefully you have a better grip on what is engagement in all its diverse forms, a better sense of what it might look like, some of the examples that are out there. But how can you get support if you wanted to put in a bid to Horizon 2020 or add engagement to an existing project? This is just a reminder that, of course, the first step is to really, for you to understand what is it you want the public to do. Is it to set the research question? Is it to gather the data? Is it to disseminate or something else? Next slide, please. Next slide. So you need to decide the role. You need to know which meeting you're in. Next slide. And an interesting to look at the. I can just give you. I cannot go through all the methods we've looked at because we've gone through 57 methods in our action catalog. And the first, and so we can't cover that in an hour. But I will compare three very common methodologies. So citizen science, which we've talked a lot about, Snapshot Serengeti, for example, well, there the role of participants is to gather and analyze data. The methodologies there really excel at that, but they're not very good at other things. And another nice function is, of course, there's no real upper limit to the number of participants in an online citizen science process, except possibly server space. But Zooniverse has 1 million users. That's a big upper limit. Type of participant will usually, it's not a problem. Diversity is not a huge issue here. You just want as many people working with you as possible. And usually, and especially today, citizen science is often done online. So that's one of the options you have at your disposal. Another, so next slide, if you then look at science shops, well, usually the role of participants there isn't to gather data, although of course they could do that, but the key role is to initialize the research, to set the research question, to be the active instigator. Number of participants, well actually it's often, so CSOs or communities who get involved, and the numbers might not be very large, especially not compared to Zooniverse. But on the other hand, they're very actively engaged. The Zooniverse, 1 million Zooniverse people might on average only spend 10 minutes, half an hour on this, whereas in a science shop, typically citizens will be more involved. And the format is, of course, you could do it online, but often it's face-to-face, and often it's more ongoing on a longer period than some of the other methodologies. Next slide. Deliberative workshops, like citizens' juries or the worldwide views formats, well, they typically are, they've traditionally at least been used to set R&I agendas and at the policy-making level. Usually the individual meeting will have less than 100 participants, or that can vary. There is often a budget issue. And typically in a deliberative process, the representativity and the diversity is a much bigger concern than it is with citizen science, for example. So you'd usually have some kind of a stratified sample, or at least a very intricate selection method to make sure that the variety of voices that exist in society are also in the room and can influence the deliberation. And normally, of course, there are experiments, but normally it's a face-to-face thing. So then if we just, so next slide, if we look at citizens' juries and citizen science, if you're new to engagement, they sound very similar. The citizens' jury involves 10 people, maybe, or up to 20. The citizen science project could involve tens of thousands of people. But on the other hand, we cannot just judge it by the number, because in the citizens' jury, the participant may have spent 10 or 20 or 30 hours discussing, debating, really understanding the issue, whereas in the citizen science process, the participant has only spent a limited time. Of course, there are super users who spend many, many hours on a project on citizen science, but the average user will have much less active involvement. Next. So it's very clear there are lots of methods out there, and these methods are complicated, they're different, they're good at different things. And therefore, we knew from the start with the Engage2020 project that people who are new to this field need help and they need support. And that's why we've developed the Action Catalogue. And this is one of the things I'm most excited about with regards to the Engage process. So how did we develop the Action Catalogue? Well, to begin with, we made a call for examples, a questionnaire which went out. We wanted to get as many examples of public engagement in research and innovation as we could, and we got over 200 responses. We then went through and really read all the cases and looked at them, and we were able to actually compile it down to 57 separate methodologies, because there were a lot of overlap, a lot of methods which were very similar and could be grouped together. And just by chance, we ended up with the same number of variety as Heinz ketchup, but 57 examples of participation. And then we developed a series of criteria which correspond to questions that beginners often have. What does the method do? How many people does it engage? Does it require me to know a lot about facilitation or have a lot of experience and knowledge around IT? And each method was then assessed according to the criteria by our consortium members who are very knowledgeable in public participation. These filled-in fact sheets were then peer-reviewed within the consortium. So every single fact, every single rating has been done by an expert and checked by an expert to make sure that it's accurate. And then it's been uploaded to an online platform, which I think I've worked with a number of toolkits, and I'm very excited by the Action Catalogue because I think it moves away from the very simplistic yes-no model into more of a weighted approach, a way of looking at the methods. Next slide. And you can find it at actioncatalogue.eu. This picture shows you the way we've chosen to list the 57 methods. And Marie-Louise, do you want to bring up the website, or do you want to share bring my desktop up? Excellent. So Marie-Louise, why don't you, while you're showing this, why don't you talk through what you're doing?
Yes, sorry, I just had to find the unmute button. This is the Action Catalogue that has been developed in the Engage2020 project. And you can see down here the sites, there are different filters, search filters that you can use. You can either just search for a specific method yourself. For example, if you wanted to hear more about the rule of use method. And then it pops up here. There's a short description, and then you can pop in, and then there will be much more detailed information about how does the meeting, how is the method carried out, what kind of things do you need to take into consideration, which levels of engagement is it used for, what are the direct results, what are the indirect results, who are the actors engaged in the process, what kind of geographical zone, what kind of challenges has it already been used for, and lots of different information that can help you get a better idea of what the method is about. There's also links to examples of where it has been used for you to get further information. So this is just a quick show of what is all the information that you can find, but just going back to how do you actually find it using the Action Catalogue. You can, for example, say, I'm looking for a method that is used that will be good for program development. I want to have dialogue and collaboration, and you can see over here the colored balls, they change depending on how much the method is relevant for the questions that you ask. I can also say that this is a very important, and it changed just a little bit. There's also what kind of participants would you like to engage? Is it citizens? And then there's also some knowledge about what kind of skills do you need to have, what kind of practical considerations do you have to take into account, what kind of budgets, and the content of the method. For example, with the things I've chosen here, a consensus conference could be a good idea, and then I can click in and read more about it, or I could go back to the research. So it's an online tool that can help you find the best method, or a method suitable for the purpose you have. And you can use as many of these filters as you want, or you can use as less as you want.
And you don't have to use the filters. Not all of the filters. It's actually quite good to select a few key questions. So I think it's a great tool. It's really, I can say this because I wasn't involved in the programming of it. It's a very interesting model. It's very dynamic. So definitely check out the action catalog. The other thing that's worth checking out is the e-anthology. And I'm not going to talk to you, I'm not going to show it to you now because I think it's better that you have a chance to look at question, but this is a truly interactive PDF or EPUB document which allows you to access links. It allows you to click on the little buttons down on the right-hand side and new information pops up. Engage2020 has been going for 2 years. We've produced a whole lot of different information, and the e-anthology is a great place to access information about kind of an entry point into all the stuff we've done. So you can go on that, you go to the Engage2020 website and the publication section. We will also find these. So we've done a number of reports. We've done the report on methods and tools, which has led directly to the action catalog. There's a really good report on the current praxis of policies and activities, and that's a great for those of you who are responsible for research policies or leaders at universities. What can I do? What can my institution do to support engagement more broadly? There's a very good theoretical overview, promises, demands, and fields of practice when it comes to public engagement. There's policy options for the engagement of science and innovation. Looking forward, what could we do in the future? And there's a very good report on the future of methodology when it comes to public participation. What will methodologies look like in the future? And indeed, the next webinar will be talking about the future, and we'll be drawing very heavily on those last two reports. We also have policy briefs. We're all busy people. Briefs are good. And this kind of summarizes, these 6 documents summarize our thinking in very important areas. All of this can be found if you go to engage2020.eu and look at our publications section. So I really encourage you to do that. And we will, of course, make the recording available. And there are other sources of information which I think are important as well. There's Public Engagement 2020, which is our sister project, led by the University of Helsinki. They've already produced a number of good reports. They're going for another year, so there will be more reports coming out of PE 2020. Do keep an eye on that. There is RRI Tools, which is doing great work. Obviously, Simulact we mentioned already, which is doing the ambitious goal of engaging with 30 countries, so all of the EU countries plus some. And Participation Compass, which is another toolkit which allows you to access methods. So there's no lack of information, there's no lack of support, and that's, I think, our key message to you going forward is if you're new to engagement, don't despair. There is help out there. There's plenty of toolkits, and we hope that the Engage project and its results will be useful for you in navigating this growing and emerging field. Next slide. But anything to add, Marie-Louise?
Oh,
But maybe actually, maybe before we do questions, maybe we should do that last slide about the slide about next session. So just so you know, next week, Thursday, Friday, we have the next 2 webinars, and there's still time to sign up. Thursday, it's the future, looking at the future of responsible research and innovation. For those of you who like a bit of sci-fi, that might be a great thing. And November 27th, on Friday, we're going to talk about how do we broaden and deepen public engagement? How do we mainstream it and make it everyday work? So, anything to add, Marie-Louise?
Just a small comment. I mean, public engagement is something that can be included in so many ways and in so many different themes. But it's also a field that has been developing for many, many years. So there are already a lot of knowledge, and there's already, what can you say, codes of conduct or things that is important to do. So it's important to make sure that if you want to do engagement in a research and innovation project, you need to be quite sure what's the purpose of it. And in order for that, and what is the right method for the purpose that you have? Because engagement, if it doesn't fit into the purpose and to the topic that you're working with, you will not get any usable results. So that's an important part. So look at the different resources that can help you find out what methods is relevant for the topic. Also, get in touch with people who already done engagement and talk to them about what kind of advices they can have on your specific issue.
Absolutely, and maybe we should say at this point that while the Engage project is drawing to a close, the consortium partners are all still very active in this. And so I think that if you have questions about technology assessment and deliberation, then contacting the Danish Board of Technology or the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology or Dialogik in Stuttgart or Involve, the University of Groningen and Henk around science shops, the ARC Fund in Bulgaria. All of our institutions are there to help, and we're very happy to support other people on their journey. I think we have like 3 minutes or so, so maybe we could. Have we had any questions, Marie-Louise?
I'm just looking through the chat, and as far as I can see, I haven't received any questions beforehand. So maybe if some of you have any questions that you would like to ask, please write them now.
If you don't have any questions, it must have been absurdly clear and concise.
Yes, sorry, there's one question here. What kind of incentives do you use to motivate engagement, in particular from citizens? And when engaging citizens, a lot of the time citizens are motivated just by being asked. If you ask them, we really would like your input, you can make a difference, a lot of citizens are actually willing to use a little time. Some of them also find it just quite interesting to see how research and innovation works. In some countries, there's also a tradition of paying just a small honorary fee for them to participate. This is not common in all countries, it's just used in some. In other countries, giving the citizens a certificate for their participation can also motivate them. But an important thing when trying to engage citizens or recruit citizens for engagement is to try to clearly explain what is the process that you want them to participate in, how will you use the results, what is it that their participation contributes to. Whether it's a research project or it's a policy formation, so that they can see they can have an influence on something or they can help contribute to some more knowledge. That's help of a part of the motivation process. I don't know, Henk or Edward, if you have anything to add.
Well, also let's not forget some of the interesting things that citizen science projects are doing. In the case with the logbooks I mentioned, they had a healthy competition whereby the person who did the most work was decreed the captain of the ship. So there's things like gamification, making engagement fun, appealing to competitive spirit, which can be quite useful. And I completely agree with what you said, Marie-Louise, about making it clear to people what they're actually contributing to can make a big difference in motivation. And of course, this is a culture shift for the institutions and the researchers, but also for the citizens. Some people may be very reluctant at first to take part and will need some encouragement and support. So if you can build a relationship with people over time, I think that helps to incentivize them. Any further questions?
The question about, do we use meetups? I have mostly dealt with face-to-face consultations. So in that respect, we haven't, if that is what is meant. I don't know if you have.
I guess in general, you could use meetups. You can use any kind of platform. I think it's always about understanding what is the platform good at. So unfortunately for us, some of the most common platforms people use day to day, where we can find citizens, are also not exactly the best engagement platforms. Twitter and Facebook have real limitations if you try and have a dialogue on them. They can be a good starting point, but oftentimes it can be online. It can be more valuable to migrate people, if you can, onto a platform which is specifically designed to achieve whatever it is you want to do with the citizens. So I think it's definitely look at what is out there and see if you can make use of tools that. I mean, engagement is often enriched by people taking tools which have been developed for different purposes in different arenas and bringing it into public engagement in science and technology.
Yeah. And maybe one thing that we haven't talked so much about, that the online tools for engagement are still, well, there's a lot of good tools and platforms for online engagement in some areas, but when it comes to the dialogue aspect, that still is in the development phase. There's still a lot of improvement there. I know there are some projects that are at the moment experimenting with doing different kinds of making platforms for different kind of dialogue, but they are still developing. It's being fine-tuned so far. It's because you lose a lot of things when going from a face-to-face to an online. If the main part of it is for the dialogue process or deliberation, but that's just one part of the different engagement tools. So it always depends on what is it that you want to achieve and what kind of methods, whether it's face-to-face or it's online or in a different format, what kind of method is the best. So if there's any more questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we would really like to thank you for participating today, and please let us know if you have any suggestions for things that we should check out, or suggestions for things that we can improve in the later webinars, which are next week.
Yeah, many thanks. It's been fun.
Thank you for participating, and we hope to see you again another time, either on the webinars or in real life. Thank you.